Saludos a todos y bienvenidos a esta nueva edición de ComiXmen. Y en esta ocasión tenemos un invitado más que increíble, más que especial. Alguien que está considerado el escritor más prolífico de Batman, ha tenido muchísimas obras, es una verdadera leyenda del mundo del cómic. Alguien a quien sinceramente es para mí un extraordinario honor tener esta plática con él y bueno, pues agradecerle que esté con nosotros. Estamos hablando de nada más y nada menos que de... Mr. Chuck Dixon, how are you, sir?
Welcome. Thank you for that great intro. Thank you.
No, thank you for accepting this little talk. I promise that I'll try to ask the right questions. Thank you, really, sir. It's for me. Like I told you a moment ago, I know that you hear this a lot, but it's really an honor for me and for the channel, for ComiXmen, to hear about you. First of all, sir, could you please tell me, how have you been? How are you? How has this pandemic times has been treating you?
Well, I'm used to being by myself all day, not seeing anyone. So there's really been no change. For me, there's no difference.
Not much different for you, really.
No, not really.
Well, that is really, really great to hear. Again, sir, thank you very much. Let me tell you this. Here in Mexico, and your work is really loved. Everybody here, everybody that is around my age and even younger remembers everything that was Nightfall. Here was a phenomenon. Obviously in the United States also it was a phenomenon around the world. Everybody remembers Nightfall. The first Robin miniseries was a hit. As far as I remember, that was the first time Robin had their own series of any kind.
Yes.
So when we read it, I remember, this is amazing. This new Robin can do things by himself. That was something that never came before. And with the great art of Tom Lyle, obviously he passed away a few years ago. Great guy. Also the creator of Scarlet Spider.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And well, obviously, Mr. Dixon is here to ask some questions that we have for him. But before it, could you please tell us, before we start with that, what is the main theme of your YouTube channel? Because you have a YouTube channel and you are very, very active on that.
Yeah, I do a weekly show called Ask Chuck Dixon, where anybody can ask me questions, via email or whatever, and basically just talk about my career in comics, the stuff I've seen, the stuff I know about, things I've done in the past, things I'm doing now. And it's a chance to basically have a conversation with, anyone who's interested in what it is I do for a living.
And what I do for a living
is write comic books.
Yeah, I am a huge fan of the Ask Chuck Dixon sections. I watch it. I try to do it as soon as they come up. They are very, very, very interesting for anybody that enjoys your work. Obviously, when this video got published, we are going to put the links to everything and, obviously promote it.
Yes.
But, well, what do you think if we start with the questions for Mr. Chuck Dixon? Yes or no?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, well, the first question will be, Mr. Dixon, could you tell us how everything started for you for you and the world of comics? Was it as a fan first, or you were a professional first? How did all start?
I was a huge comic fan even before I could read comics. I mean, I was just a little kid, 3-4 years old, and I would look at the comics and basically learn how to reading comics. And I just thought I love them so much. I just love the medium. I never wanted to do anything else. So, I wasn't a very good school student, because I was mostly interested in learning from Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and people like that. And then, I was a big fan, and I would go to conventions and shows, and I would meet editors, and I would meet artists and writers, and just pester them with questions about the business. And eventually, I got interviews at both DC and Marvel, and through Timothy Truman, I broke into Eclipse Comics doing Airboy, and then Larry Hama, the creator of all those G.I. Joe characters, almost simultaneously, he gave me a job writing for him, and eventually I wrote Conan the Barbarian at Marvel. And at that point, I went full-time as a writer. I quit my day job and became a comic book writer full-time.
Can I ask you, what was your day job back in the day?
At the time I started working on Conan, I was a security guard. But,
really?
but I had been a janitor. I had driven an ice cream truck. I had done all kinds of different jobs.
I can assure you, I have heard things about people who write, obviously, and I can assure you that all of those experiences helped you a lot in your new career.
Because I worked overnights at a convenience store, and that teaches you a lot about the human race.
I can imagine, Mr. Dixon. Well, that actually. It's something that a lot of us can identify, because we all are a bunch of what would you call them, nerds?
Nerds, geeks, fans,
nerds, geeks, whatever. And we can identify with that. We start with that, and to hear that a person that came up to write one of the most legendary Batman books or Batman stories. It's something that it's very, very valuable for us mere mortals.
No, we're all the same. I just I got real lucky, but exactly. I'm as much a geek as you are, and as much as everybody watching us probably.
That is great, and it's something that it's noticeable in your and I mean in a good way, obviously. Right. In your Chuck Dixon, Ask Chuck Dixon. They are great, and I cannot recommend it enough. As a matter of fact, we'll do it more, because maybe it's not enough. They are very interesting. And well, that leads me to the other question that I have for you. It's obviously related to the writing, to all the writing. Let me read it for you, obviously. You are considered to be the most prolific comic book writer in history, with more than 40,000, I think more, published pages, thing that is really amazing. Could you please tell us, when was the exact moment when you decided to become a writer, and what kind of training or what kind of formation did you receive, or was just self-taught, or what happened over there?
I was mostly self-taught, just by reading a lot of comics. And because all you had was the comics. There wasn't a lot written about how comics were created. I had no idea how they were written. I used to draw them, because I thought that's how you write a comic. You actually have to draw the pictures. And then, nobody was writing reviews or criticisms of comics. So, I was pretty much left to my own devices. And, I wasn't very good at math in school, but I was good at English, and I liked history. So, and I was always reading. It's constantly, not just comics, but all kinds of books. And then, meeting people, getting to know people. And it wasn't until the late 70s, I was visiting DC, and Robert Kanigher gave me a Sergeant Rock script. And so I finally, for the first time, saw a comic book script. I saw how they were written. And I still use his exact form to this day. That's, what Bob Kanigher gave me is how I write now. And it's, it's for me the best way for writing comics. So I had a way to focus all my crazy ideas onto a piece of paper, so that an artist could understand what I was going for.
And the moment in which you decided that you wanted to become a writer was when you were a kid, or later?
Oh yeah. I like telling stories, and I just like stories. I mean, the only times I excelled at school was when it was, creative writing or something creative involving, words and pictures and things like that. So that was the only time I really was an honor student, was when I got to do that kind of stuff.
When everybody was looking, where is Chuck? I need a script. I need a story. I need to invent a lie in order to skip school today.
It's funny, because I never skipped school. I never thought of that. But
maybe your friends?
No, I mean, in sixth grade, I wrote the school play. I it's always been a thing for me, and comics were always the focus. I mean, I wrote other things. I wrote children's books and things like that, but I only wanted to write comics. It's all the only way I was going to be happy.
That actually leads me to my next question that is related to what you say about you always wanted to write comic books, but other stuff also was in your way. And I don't want to pass the opportunity to ask you about this. You are also a novelist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And before we enter into comic book territory, because we have a lot to talk about comic books, I want to point out your work as a novelist, as a novel author, with books like this one, Live on Cade series. Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about Live on Cade?
Well, there was a period like, the early 2010s, I wasn't getting as much comic work as I wanted to. And so I thought, well, I want to write. I still want to tell stories. And so I began doing these, in ebooks, electronic books. And I basically started writing novels. I mean, Dynamite, a publisher here, asked me to write some novels about the SEAL teams, the U.S. Navy SEAL teams. So I wrote 6 of them. And then I thought, well, why don't I start writing my own stuff? And the first thing I turned to was Live on Cade, because I missed writing the Punisher. And I wanted to write a character somewhat like the Punisher. And Levon he's a dad. He's got a young daughter, and he basically gets himself in a lot of trouble. He's a former Marine, just like Frank Castle is, but Levon's from the deep South in the United States. He's from Alabama, and he's pretty much a hillbilly, and he takes a different view of life. Well, so I've written. I just finished the 10th novel.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
So I need to ask this, obviously, because of the of the people who is going to watch this talk that we're having. Do you have any plans to eventually put it in Spanish, or it's available in Spanish?
I mean, if I was approached, certainly. I have a new editor at my publishing company, and he basically wants to pay more attention to Live on Cade. And he wants to do audiobooks and things like that. But I would certainly be wide open to translating it into other languages. I think it's a universal character, the sort of rugged individual guy looking out for his daughter. A lot of people could understand that. He's it's got a lot of mass appeal. I think it would do well in other languages. I'd be happy as hell if it was published in Mexico.
So I am correct in assuming that Live on Cade is your version or your stand for Frank Castle then?
Yeah, it's like the Punisher is the only character I still think of stories for, even though I'm not paid to write them. I don't think of Batman stories or Green Arrow stories, but I do think of Frank Castle stories because he was always so reactive to what was going on in the world. So I thought, I've got to do something because I think of all these stories, but I'm not writing that character anymore. So I just created my own. And the Punisher comes from a long line of vigilante type characters in paperback form here in the United States. I don't know if the Executioner was published in Mexico, but it was huge here. Paperback series in the 70s. So
yeah, he was the basis for the Punisher. I remember that perfectly. They have said that a lot of times.
Yes.
And yeah, but no, I really don't think the Executioner was published here. Maybe I am wrong with that. That was back in the 70s.
Yeah.
But that kind of character have a lot of appealing for everybody. I mean,
sure.
And especially here in Mexico, let me tell you, because here we know one thing or two about crime,
right?
One thing or two. And well,
everybody wants that hero who comes and sets things right. It doesn't matter where you come from in the world.
Yeah,
you want that hero, that badass who comes in and makes everything okay now.
That is exactly the reason why the Punisher. Punisher is my favorite character. Well, he and Conan the Barbarian. So if we talk about Marvel Comics, for me, is the Punisher. Obviously, I never said who is my favorite superhero, the Punisher. Well, not exactly. It's not like a superhero, but
right.
Come on, it's at least my favorite character he is. And we're going to talk about that in a moment, because you wrote one of the what I believe is one of the more genuine Punisher moments ever, but maybe we can talk about it in a second. But well, okay, Levon Cave, for everybody that don't know him and don't know about the work of Mr. Dixon with novels, it's highly recommend, highly recommend. Now, what do you say if we talk about Batman? Because, like I told you a moment ago, it's fair to say that here in Mexico, your work on Batman is very much admired, loved. Nightfall, I told you a moment ago, was an absolute phenomenon. I remember like nothing else before. I have said this before, but I think that here in Mexico, Nightfall was even more popular than The Death of Superman. Maybe some people could say, oh, well, it's debatable. I really don't think so. I think that Nightfall was a little more popular here in Mexico, at least. No? Prior to that, like I told you, the first Robin miniseries was very well received. One of my personal favorites also. But could you tell us how did you arrive to the Batman offices, to the editorial offices of Batman? How was Chuck Dixon's path to write Batman?
Well, Denny O'Neil was looking for somebody to write Tim Drake Robin, basically do a miniseries, which is what we did. Mm-hmm. And he liked my work on the Airboy, which is a title I just mentioned, because Airboy was a young character. He's a teenage character. And he liked how I wrote Airboy. And he thought that I might be good on, Tim Drake, because Tim Drake was a teenager too. And so, I lived in Philadelphia, which is about an hour or so away from New York. So he called me and said, would I come up and meet with him? I met with him, and he explained the importance, how important this new character was, this new Robin was. And, and he was Denny O'Neil. So I listened, Denny O'Neil, the savior of Batman. And so we talked about it, and like I usually do, I said, I have to think about it because I want to make sure I'm the right guy for the job. I never just say yes to any job, even though this was a big one. Working on Batman, I never dreamed I'd work on Batman. And so, after talking it over, I said, yeah, let me show you some story ideas. He liked them, and then that was it. I was part of the Batman universe for the next 10 years.
Yeah, and it was quite a ride. Obviously, like I told you a moment ago, here it had a great reception. All the work that you have, your work is always reliable. I don't know if I am using this correctly, but it's like I need the real Batman, at least for me, okay, or for the people who grow up during that particular part of time. I need the real Batman, and it's reliable. Just grab something from Chuck Dixon. That's it. and I know about the speed that you have. That I think that got reflected into the title that you held about. Well, maybe that's not an official title yet, or it is about you being the most prolific writer.
Well, it's been confirmed by a few comic book scholars, and I have a guy I know who's a statistician. I mean, he looked at the numbers, and I pass all of the other guys. I mean, Paul S. Newman and Gaylord Dubois, who wrote for Dell Comics, they wrote Tarzan, Lone Ranger, things like that. They were considered the most prolific, but their work stops at like 36,000 pages of comics, and I go way past that. And this statistician, he laid it all out. The numbers are there. I didn't know. I was shocked because it never seemed like work to me. I mean, it wasn't like I was trying to do more writing than anybody else. That's just the way it turned out. But to find out that I'd written more than Bob Kanigher, I'd written more than Stan Lee, I was like, whoa. It was a surprise to me, but numbers don't lie.
I want to use this moment to ask you, for example, about the famous Marvel method for writing. It's something that you have used, because a moment ago you said that essentially no, but still I would like to ask, have you used that sometimes?
Yeah, when I got to Marvel, that was the way they wanted you to write everything.
Okay.
And I didn't like it. At the time, it was called the Lee Kirby Method, because that's how Stan Lee and Jack Kirby worked. But I always said, Well, yeah, but they were Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. They could work that way. Not everybody is Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And I wrote a few issues of Savage Sword of Conan that way. And finally, I had become friends with Gary Quapis, the artist on it. And I said, Gary, let me write full script because I think the end result will be better. And I'm flexible. I mean, you can change things if you want, but you know, I was getting these pages back, and Conan is swinging a sword and yelling. And what's he yelling? Well, I don't know what he's saying. So then I would have to fill in all those. And I said, this isn't working. It doesn't feel good to me. So he said, well, yeah, okay, go with a full script. And he admitted, he said, this is better. It's more of a guideline. It's more of a collaboration. And then from that point on, I never worked that way again, except when I worked with Johnny Romita Jr. On Punisher. And then I worked with Joe Kubert on Punisher. And for them, I gave them plot only. But with both of them, I said, look, I'm going to give you the plot, but I'm going to give you all the dialogue, you know, so that you know what's going on in their minds. You know what they're saying. And that worked out. So.
And is there any reason why you think those guys decided it was like a policy for Marvel? Did they wanted to encourage that way or method of work or something? Was something special reason or no?
Well, Stan did it because he could write a lot quickly. You know, well, the rest of them wrote that way because it was easier for them. Quite frankly, I don't think a lot of these guys were editing and writing, and they would kind of write at home for extra money. Yeah. And I think that's what it was all about, was the extra money. They really didn't care if the stories were any good. Yeah. And, you know, artists would show me these plots they gave them. And I'm like, wow, they're making the artists do all the work. You know, things weren't broken down. They weren't. And it was especially troublesome when we would do crossovers at Marvel, because if you read a Marvel crossover from the 90s, nothing matches up because, you know, nothing was established in the plot lines. So you'll have a bunch of artists just drawing what they think is supposed to be in the story, and nothing links up. And I found it, you know, inconsistent, and, you know, it just wasn't the best work. It's just not the best way of working, like I said, unless you're Lee and Kirby. Yeah,
unless you're Lee and Kirby. And actually, that leads me to my next question related to this great talk that we're having with Mr. Chuck Dixon today. It's related exactly to crossovers, because after Nightfall and its sequels, because it was Nightfall, Night Quest, Night Sent, I always mix up the other two, but they were obviously the sequels, right. And there were other legendary mega crossovers. The crossovers everywhere for the Bat family. Contagion, Legacy, Cataclysm, No Man's Land, and you were at the center of all of that. Can you tell us, because that is very, very much in synchrony with what you just said, how is the editorial process to write a crossover like that? How was it in the Batman offices? How did all the writers and editors of the Bat books agree? You can write this, you cannot write that. I am going to do this with this character. You are not allowed to do this other thing. How was that? Can you tell us about it?
Well, when Denny was group editor, I mean, he was like in charge. So particularly on Nightfall, I mean, he laid the whole thing out for us. We knew all the dramatic high points. We knew all the reveals, all the surprises, all the twists and turns. And then it was our job to break it down into issues, which we did. Okay. We would actually meet for like 3 or 4 days and spend all day, you know, going issue by issue, month by month. This has to happen in this issue, and this has to happen in this issue. And for the most part, it was the issue has to begin here and end there, but everything in between is up to you. And Denny said that he didn't hire writers, he hired storytellers. That he knew that we'd be into it. And we all were. I mean, Doug Mensch, Alan Grant, and I, we were very much aware of the opportunity we were given, and we were very earnest about the work, and we really sweated it. And we got along. You know, there's always egos, but we put them aside to make this thing as good as we could. And as I said, we had Denny. You know, Denny was there. You know, he was the boss. He was making sure everything stayed on track. But for the most part, he was hands off. Unless you did something wrong, he didn't get into it with you. Now the crossovers that followed, I don't think they were as strong as Nightfall, but we basically did them the same way. We would meet for 3 or 4 days and map the whole thing out.
So it's fair to say that mostly there was a lot of agreement. And I'm not asking just to be like, oh yeah, the gossip. No. I mean, like you said, there was a lot of ego involved. Maybe somebody said, well, I want to do things differently.
I don't recall a single argument creatively.
Great.
We argued about other things, but we never argued about Batman.
Really?
The only time there was like that Denny was surprised was after everything was over, after Night's End and everything had been done, Denny wanted to start doing the stories where it would be the same writer on all 3 books each month. So 1 month Doug would write Batman, Shadow of the Bat, a detective. Next month I would, and next month Alan would. And I objected. I said, I don't want to do that because I'm working with my friend Graham Nolan, and I think we're doing really good work, and I don't want to break that up. And also, each book is very different. I mean, you had Kelly Jones. I said, Kelly Jones's art doesn't look anything like Graham's. Kelly's great, but his artwork doesn't look like Graham Nolan's. Mm-hmm. So if you have them all in the exact same story, it's going to be a mess. And Denny was kind of surprised because he said, well, the book Batman pays more royalties than the book you're currently writing. So you would get a bump in pay. You would make more money doing it the way I'm saying. And I said, I don't care about that. And so he had to get on the phone to, I believe Paul Levitz was the publisher at that time, our editor-in-chief, and tell him, he says, all the plans we talked about, Chuck won't do it. And the thing is that I know that Doug and Alan felt the same way I did, but they didn't speak up.
They didn't want to say anything. Just
because Doug loved working with Kelly as much as I loved working with Graham. And Alan, he liked being left on his own as much as possible. And we were all at this point getting a little tired of crossovers. We wanted to do our own thing for a while. And so that's the only time anything close to an argument, and even then it didn't get mean. It was just a disagreement over how to proceed.
So then it was like a lot of good comrades, a group of friends, you could say, co-workers that get along very good.
Yeah. I mean, we had like I said, we argued about everything but Batman.
Well, yeah, obviously, I don't know, maybe what the game or something like that, I can assume, but nothing about essentially work.
No. We put it all aside. We would argue politics or argue about movies or whatever. And then when it was time to work, it was time to work. And you forgot all of that.
This has to be, I have to ask you this question. Speaking about Batman, Bane, it's obviously, I can assume, or we all know that is the creation you are most well-known about.
Oh, yeah.
To put Bane out there. It was a huge success as a character. But here I need to ask you some questions about him, because obviously it's a favorite of a lot of people. What kind of character exactly were you looking for when you created Bane? How did the idea come about of creating a guy like that, exactly like that? What was the process?
Well, when we began Nightfall, we knew Denny wanted a new villain. He didn't want to use an established villain to break Batman's back. He wanted a new guy. And he thought, if we do this right, when this is over, we'll have an established villain we can keep using. And for the most part, Bane was created to take the place of KG Beast. Because at this point, the Soviet Union had fallen, and KG Beast was an irrelevant character. But the thing about KG Beast was he was really tough, but he was also really smart. And that's what we knew we wanted. We wanted a villain who was every bit as smart and every bit as physically capable and tough as Batman. So what Denny didn't want is what happened in Death of Superman, where they didn't come out the other end with a villain they could keep using, because Superman was basically killed by a thug. But we didn't want that. Denny didn't want that. So we began working with the idea in mind of what this guy was, and we knew he would be addicted to Venom, the super steroid. So that's all we knew going in. And we did a lot of setup, but it reached a point where we needed to know who this guy was. And we had a mini summit. It was just a few of us. And I talked about how hard this was going to be, because for Nightfall to work, this villain had to be accepted by the fans. They had to love him or hate him or whatever it is we wanted them to do. Nightfall really rested on the shoulders of this villain. And I said, how do you create a character to be popular? I mean, what do you do, right? That's a lot of, where do you even start? And Denny said, well, if you think it's going to be that hard, you go do it. Because he knew I would sweat it. He knew I would put all the work in. And I did. And I knew Graham Nolan was going to draw him. So I came home and I called Graham, and I was like thinking out loud. And I said, I think I want him to be from Santa Prisca, the made up Caribbean island. Mm-hmm. And I said, I want him to have a Hispanic background. And Graham said, well, since he uses venom, and we'll see his muscles expand when he pumps himself up with venom, he says, what if we go for the luchador look? And I said, okay, that's great. And he did some drawings and faxed them to me. And this is before he could put images on emails. And so I was all for that. And then I began to think, I had read an article about how in North Korea, if your father committed a crime and they couldn't catch him, they put you in jail to serve his sentence. And I thought, what if a little kid got put in a prison? And then I thought, well, whoa, what if he was born in prison? What if his mother was sentenced for his father's crimes and he was born in prison to a life sentence? And I thought that matches or mirrors Bruce Wayne's beginnings, because Bruce Wayne is born of a childhood trauma. Mm-hmm. And I said, here's a guy who his whole childhood was a trauma. And what kind of a monster would come out the other end of that? What kind of a person could survive that? They'd have to be really tough, and they'd have to be really smart, and they'd have to, even from a young age, play that politics that happens even inside of a prison, so that they came out on top. And he does. He's the king. He's the big man at Santa Prisca before he ends up coming to Gotham. And that's basically how I came up with it. And I'm still surprised that he became as popular as he is.
Well, I really, after hearing this incredible description that you gave, I really feel that it was certain then that he was going to become popular, because he has aspects of leadership that and kind of aspiration that anybody could have to say, yeah, I know I'm gonna come on top. I'm gonna do this right. I'm gonna be the best. This is not going to defeat me. Even if it's evil, it's something that everybody can identify with.
Well, you can even admire him. I mean, it's possible to admire a bad guy, even though he's doing the wrong thing. He thinks he's doing what he thinks is right for him.
Yeah. And I believe with hearing that, it makes perfect sense. It's I have seen saying this a lot of times, and I know that you're a person that also believes in this. It's superficial things doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. It's what it's inside of the character, all how the character acts, the example that is giving you. Even if it's a bad person, you admire him because he's evil and he's compelling and it's a real threat for the hero. And that is the important part of all of this.
Yeah. The villain can't just be, I'm just a bad guy and I want to do bad things. It's like they either have to have a reason, or they have to have something that makes you somewhat sympathetic toward them, somewhat understanding. Like, yeah, they're doing horrible things, but I kind of get why they're doing it. It makes sense why they're doing it. I still wish they wouldn't, but it makes sense to me why they're doing what they're doing.
Kind of what we said a moment ago about the Punisher. The same thing. We'll never do that, but come on, it's great to read about that. That is the escapism, fantasy, everything. That is what makes comic book great.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's fantasy, but you have to make it seem real.
Yeah, of course. No, of course. I mean, it's the suspension of disbelief, like they say it is, no?
Yeah, okay. But you shouldn't make the reader work at that. you should do all of the work to create that suspension of disbelief. Obviously,
and that is that. And with Bane, it's great. Speaking again about Bane, I have to ask this because, well, we are here in Mexico, and it's something that all the time comes up. And this is about the design of the character. Does Bane have influences from the world of wrestling, from the world of lucha libre? I am asking this because of the mask. It's very similar to the luchador mask.
Yeah, the look very much comes from Mexican wrestling.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
The steroids.
Yeah, well, I don't know so much of steroids. I don't know that much about wrestling, either American or Mexican. But yeah, looking at those guys, I've met a bunch of American wrestlers. So yeah, maybe there's some steroids involved.
Well, obviously, I am not saying not saying no. Everybody uses no. That is not
Right.
that was not them.
The 90s certainly. 90s steroids were a big thing.
Well, yeah, but it's like how can we put the name? It's a stereotype.
Yes.
That they say, oh yeah, those guys made something and they become bigger. That's like a stereotype. Also, the masks here in Mexico, for example, not all the luchadores use the mask, but this is a stereotype. Okay,
yes.
everybody knows El Santo, Blue Demon. I don't know if you have heard about those guys.
Oh no, absolutely, we hear about them. So.
Yeah, those are like the stereotypes for everything else. And well, it was good to hear from one of the creators that, yeah, actually it has some roots or some influences from.
No, absolutely.
From Mexico. And also, the last question related to Bane: is Bane your favorite creation?
Well, yeah. I mean, he'd have to be because he's a household name. Everybody knows who he is. I've created a lot of characters, but he's the only one I never have to explain. Everybody knows who Bane is, and I see people, he's used in jokes all the time and everything else. I mean, he's a part of the culture of the world now, which still amazes me.
Yeah. And now everybody can understand. Everybody knew this, but now everybody can understand why he endured much more than Doomsday.
Poor Doomsday.
Yeah, it's easy to understand now that you said that, and once you read everything and you say, yeah, come on, it's because of.
I mean, Death of Superman is great, but I really wish they spent more time on Doomsday.
Yeah, but it's too powerful. Doomsday was too powerful, and that was the problem with Doomsday, I think. Yeah, he was extremely powerful all the time, and well, it's very difficult to come up with something all the time for a character like that.